The Galactic Assembly had existed for 12,000 years. It was a council of over 400 different species from across the stars. They had built empires, fought wars, and made peace. They believed they understood how the universe worked. They believed they had seen everything. Then they found Earth. Ambassador HFY of the Veloci Collective was the first to make contact with humanity. His species had discovered the small blue planet on the edge of the Orion Arm during a routine survey mission. The Veloci were an ancient race with compound eyes and skin that shifted colors with their emotions. They had been part of the Assembly for 6,000 years and considered themselves wise in the ways of the galaxy. When HFY first saw the humans, he thought they would be easy to understand. They were soft creatures with only 2 eyes and no natural weapons. They had been traveling through space for barely 200 years. By galactic standards, they were infants. He was wrong about them. He was very, very wrong. The human delegation that came to meet him was led by a woman named Lisa Cole. She was not tall or particularly strong. She had dark hair with streaks of gray and eyes that seemed to look right through him. When HFY explained the benefits of joining the Galactic Assembly, she listened politely. When he described the rules and obligations, she asked questions that made him uncomfortable. Who decides which species gets protected? She asked. Who decides which wars are worth fighting? HFY had no good answers. The Assembly made those decisions based on calculations, resources, strategic value, political importance. Some species mattered more than others. That was simply how things worked. Lisa Cole smiled at him. It was not a warm smile. We'll need to discuss this with our people, she said. We'll be in touch. 3 years later, humanity joined the Assembly. But they did not join like other species. They negotiated. They demanded changes. They insisted on things that seemed foolish to the other races. And then they did something that changed everything. The Razari swarm appeared in Veloci space without warning. The Razari were an insectoid species that moved through the galaxy like a plague. They did not build. They did not create. They consumed. Their living ships would descend on a world, strip it of all resources and life, and then move on. They had destroyed hundreds of civilizations over the millennia. The Assembly had learned to deal with the Razari through sacrifice. When a swarm appeared, the affected systems were abandoned. Populations were evacuated if there was time. If there was not time, the populations were written off as acceptable losses. The swarm would feed and then move on. It was terrible, but it was efficient. The Razari swarm that hit HFY was massive. 200,000 living ships, each one the size of a small moon. They surrounded the planet in hours. 40,000 Veloci colonists were trapped on the surface with no way to escape. The Assembly calculated the odds. Rescue was impossible. The military forces required would be too great, the losses too severe. The official recommendation was to quarantine the sector and wait. Commander Lisa Cole received this recommendation on the bridge of the human carrier, Endurance. She read it twice. Then she set it aside. How long until the Razari reached the colony? She asked. Lieutenant Danny Park checked his console. He was young, barely 30, with a face that still looked boyish despite the stress of military life. 6 hours, ma'am. Maybe less. And how long until we can get there? 4 hours at maximum speed. But ma'am, the Assembly has already... I know what the Assembly has done. Lisa stood and looked out at the stars. The weight of command had aged her. She had buried too many friends, written too many letters to grieving families. But she had never turned away from someone who needed help. She was not going to start now. Signal the fleet, she said. All ships. We're going to HFY. Danny stared at her. Ma'am, we have 12 ships. The swarm has 200,000. The math doesn't. "The math never works, Lieutenant." Lisa turned to face him. "If we only fought battles we could win on paper, we would never fight at all. Those are 40,000 people down there. They have families. They have children. They are scared and alone, and they think no one is coming for them." She paused. "We're going to prove them wrong." The human fleet jumped to faster than light speed. 12 ships against an army. It should have been suicide. On the surface of HFY, a Veloci child named Thera huddled in a basement shelter with her family. She could hear the Razari ships entering the atmosphere. The sound was like thunder that never stopped. Her mother held her close and whispered prayers to gods that had never answered. Thera was 7 years old. She did not understand why the assembly had abandoned them. She did not understand politics or calculations or acceptable losses. She only knew that she was afraid and that no one was coming to save her. And then the sky changed. The first human ships dropped out of faster than light, right in the middle of the Razari formation. It was a move so unexpected that the swarm took precious minutes to react. In those minutes, the humans struck. Commander Cole's voice came over every channel, calm and steady. "All ships, weapons free. Prioritize the landing craft. Keep them away from the colony. We hold until everyone is evacuated." The battle that followed would become legend. The Razari were not used to prey that fought back. Their usual targets fled or surrendered. But the humans did neither. They dove into the swarm like wolves into a flock of sheep. Their ships were smaller and fewer, but they were fast and they were fearless. On the bridge of the Endurance, alarms blared and damage reports flooded in. A section of the ship's hull had been breached. 17 crew members were dead. But Lisa did not order a retreat. Instead, she pushed forward. "Target their command ships," she ordered. "Make them feel us." Across the fleet, human captains made the same choice. They ignored the odds. They ignored the danger. They fought with everything they had because they were people who needed saving. And somewhere on HFY, a little girl named Thera looked up as the thunder changed. The Razari ships were screaming now, burning, falling from the sky. Someone had come. The ground shook with every explosion. Sergeant Kevin Hayes pressed himself against a broken wall and tried to catch his breath. His rifle was hot in his hands. His boots were covered in ash and blood that was not his own. He had been fighting for 18 hours straight. Around him, the Veloci capital city was burning. The beautiful towers that had once reached toward the sky were now shattered stumps. The streets were filled with rubble and bodies. And somewhere in this hell, there were still civilians who needed to be saved. "Sergeant." Corporal Maria Reyes slid into cover beside him. She was small, barely 5 feet tall, with dark hair tied back in a messy ponytail. Her face was streaked with dirt and sweat. "We've got movement 2 blocks east. Looks like a refugee group trying to reach the evacuation point." Kevin checked his ammunition. Half a magazine left. He had started the day with 12. "How many Razari between us and them?" "At least 50. Maybe more. 50 alien warriors against 8 human soldiers." The Razari were nightmare creatures, standing 7 feet tall with 6 limbs and natural armor that could stop most bullets. Their mandibles could cut through steel. Their claws could tear a person in half. Kevin looked at his squad. They were exhausted. Some of them were wounded. Private Sam Torres had a gash across his forehead that kept dripping blood into his eyes. Private Amy Lynn was limping from a leg wound she had wrapped herself. None of them looked like they could fight another battle. None of them hesitated when Kevin gave the order. "We move fast and we move quiet," he said. "Torres, you're on point. Reyes, watch our backs. Everyone else, conserve your ammunition. We're going to need every bullet." They moved through the ruins like ghosts. The Razari were not subtle creatures. They communicated through clicks and screeches that echoed through the empty streets. Kevin used the noise to track them, leading his squad through alleys and collapsed buildings to avoid the largest groups. When they found the refugees, Kevin's heart broke. There were about 30 of them. Veloci civilians, mostly elderly and children. They had been hiding in the basement of what used to be a school. When Kevin's squad appeared, the adults shrieked in terror. They had never seen humans before. To them, Kevin and his soldiers were just another type of alien, possibly just as dangerous as the Rosari. "It's okay," Kevin said softly, holding up his hands. "We're here to help. We're going to get you out." A young Veloci female stepped forward. She was holding a small child against her chest. Her compound eyes reflected Kevin's face 100 times over. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Why would you help us? We are not your people." Kevin did not have time to answer. The Rosari had found them. The creatures came through the walls. They came through the floor. They came in a wave of claws and mandibles and hunger. Kevin's squad formed a circle around the refugees and opened fire. The next few minutes were chaos. Kevin lost count of how many Rosari he killed. He felt claws rake across his back and ignored the pain. He saw Torres go down under 2 of the creatures and fought his way through to pull the young private free. He watched Maria Reyes empty her rifle, draw her knife, and keep fighting. When it was over, the basement was filled with Rosari bodies. 3 of Kevin's soldiers were dead. 4 more wounded badly enough that they could barely walk. But the refugees were alive. Kevin picked up a Veloci child who had been separated from her mother. The little creature was shaking so hard she could barely hold on to him. "I've got you," he said. "I've got you. You're safe now." Above them, the battle in space had become something that would be remembered for centuries. Commander Lisa Cole stood on the bridge of the Endurance, gripping a console to stay upright. Her left arm was wrapped in bandages soaked with blood. Shrapnel had torn through her shoulder an hour ago. She had refused to leave her post. "Status report," she demanded. Lieutenant Danny Park's voice was hoarse. "We've lost the Valor and the Steadfast. The Courage is venting atmosphere, but still fighting. The Swarm has lost approximately 60,000 ships." 60,000. It sounded like a lot. It was not enough. Evacuation status? 32,000 colonists have made it to the transport ships. 8,000 remain on the surface. Lisa closed her eyes for a moment. 8,000 people still trapped. Her ships were dying around her. Every minute, more human lives were lost. Any rational commander would have calculated the losses and ordered a retreat. The humans had already saved more than anyone expected. They had done enough. But Lisa Cole was not a rational commander. She was human. "All ships," she said over the fleet channel. We hold. We hold until every civilian is off that planet. Is that understood?" The response came back from every captain still alive. "Understood, Commander." We hold. On the surface, Kevin Hayes led the refugees through 3 miles of Rosari-infested territory. He carried wounded soldiers on his back. He fought off ambush. He refused to leave anyone behind, even when his body screamed for rest. When they finally reached the evacuation point, the Veloci who had questioned him was still alive. She still held her child against her chest. She looked at Kevin with an expression he could not read. "What is your name?" she asked. "Hayes," he said. "Sergeant Kevin Hayes. I will remember you, Sergeant Kevin Hayes." She reached out and touched his bloodied hand. "My people will remember all of you, forever." The last transport lifted off from Keth 4 as the sun set over the burning city. 8,000 more lives saved. And above them, the human fleet continued to fight, holding back the swarm until every single refugee was safely away. When it was finally over, the Rosari retreated. The swarm had been broken. They would not recover for decades. The cost had been terrible. A third of the human fleet was destroyed. 2,000 soldiers had died on the ground. Commander Lisa Cole had taken 3 more wounds by the end, any one of which would have killed a lesser person. But 38,000 Veloci colonists were alive. And across the galaxy, the other species began to whisper about the humans. They whispered about a species that fought for strangers. A species that died for people they had never met. A species that did not know when to quit. The whispers would grow into legends. And the legends would become something that the galaxy had never seen before. Fear. The Galactic Assembly Chamber fell silent when the humans entered. It had been 3 weeks since the Battle of HFY. 3 weeks since a dozen human ships had broken the largest Razari swarm in recorded history. 3 weeks since the galaxy had been forced to realize that it did not understand humanity at all. Commander Lisa Cole walked slowly, her arm still in a sling. Beside her was Sergeant Kevin Hayes, who had been promoted twice since the battle and still looked uncomfortable in his new uniform. Behind them came a small delegation of human officers and diplomats. The assembly was the largest gathering of species in the known galaxy. 400 different races, each with their own appearance, their own culture, their own way of seeing the universe. Some were massive, towering over the humans like mountains. Some were tiny, watching from specialized platforms. Some had tentacles. Some had wings. Some had forms that human minds could barely understand. All of them were staring at the humans with something that looked like fear. Counselor Mithra of the Kovani Empire was the first to speak. He was an ancient being, his body supported by mechanical devices that kept him alive. He had seen civilizations rise and fall. He had survived 3 galactic wars. He had never seen anything like the humans. "Commander Cole," he said, his voice thin and reedy, "on behalf of the Galactic Assembly, I wish to express our gratitude for your actions at HFY. You saved 40,000 lives that we had written off as lost." Lisa nodded politely. 38,000, Counselor. We lost 2,000 in the fighting. Yes, Mithra shifted uncomfortably. We have studied your species since the battle. We have examined your history, your military traditions, your cultural values. What we have learned has been educational. Across the chamber, displays flickered to life. Images appeared, drawn from human databases and historical records. Battles, wars, conflicts stretching back thousands of years. Your species has a concept called the last stand, Mithra continued. A situation where soldiers choose to die rather than retreat. You celebrate these events. You build monuments to them. You teach your children about them. Lisa said nothing. You have another concept called rescue missions. You risk many lives to save few. You trade soldiers for civilians. You treat every individual life as if it has infinite value, even when the mathematics clearly show otherwise. With respect, Counselor, Kevin said quietly, life is not mathematics. The chamber stirred. Several species made sounds of confusion or disagreement. To most galactic cultures, this statement was nonsense. Everything was mathematics. Everything could be calculated. We have made a decision, Mithra said. The Assembly has created a new classification for human military forces. You are now officially designated as Elite Forces, Tier 1. This is the highest military classification in our system. Lisa raised an eyebrow. What does that mean? Another counselor spoke, a Veloci ambassador whose skin shifted through colors of deep purple. This was HFY, the first alien to have made contact with humanity. It means several things, Commander. First, human forces can only be deployed for existential threats. Wars that threaten the survival of entire species. Situations where all other options have failed. And second? Lisa asked. Cuthbert's colors shifted to a shade Lisa had learned to recognize as shame. Second, a warning has been attached to your species designation. All assembly members are advised that engagement with human forces is not recommended under any circumstances. The chamber was silent again. Lisa understood what they were really saying. They were afraid of humans. Not because humans were powerful or technologically advanced. Humans were actually rather average in those areas. They were afraid because humans were unpredictable. Because humans did things that made no sense. Because humans would die for strangers without hesitation. To the rational species of the galaxy. This was terrifying. So were weapons, Kevin said bitterly. Tools to be used when things get desperate. That is not, Methra began. That's exactly what it is. Lisa's voice was calm but firm. You don't understand us, so you've put us in a box. Elite forces. Only for emergencies. A warning label attached. She looked around the chamber. You know what I find interesting, Counselor? You've studied our history. You've seen our wars, our atrocities, our failures. But you've also seen something else. You've seen that every time things got dark, there were humans who stood up, who fought for something better, who refused to accept that evil was inevitable. She stepped forward, and several nearby counselors flinched. We're not elite forces because we're better at killing. We're elite forces because we care. Because when we see suffering, we can't look away. Because we would rather die trying to help than live knowing we didn't. She paused. That's not a weapon, Counselor. That's a conscience. The assembly had no response. Later, in a quiet corridor outside the chamber, Kevin found Lisa staring out a window at the stars. Think they understood? He asked. No. Lisa's voice was tired. They never will. To them, sacrifice without reward is insanity. Dying for strangers is a malfunction. They see us as defective. She smiled slightly. Maybe we are. If caring about others is a defect, Kevin said, then I'm happy to be broken. They stood in silence for a while, watching distant stars twinkle. What happens now? Kevin finally asked. Now we go home. We bury our dead. We heal our wounds. Lisa turned to look at him. And we wait for the next time someone needs us. And we'll go? Even though they think we're monsters? Lisa reached out and put her hand on his shoulder. We'll go because that's who we are, Sergeant. We don't help people because they understand us or appreciate us. We help them because they need help. That's all the reason we've ever needed. Kevin nodded slowly. He thought about the Veloci child he had carried through the burning streets. He thought about the mother who had touched his hand and promised to remember him forever. He thought about his friends who had died so that strangers could live. Yes, ma'am, he said. That's all the reason we've ever needed. Across the galaxy, the news spread. The humans had been classified as elite forces. The most dangerous soldiers in known space. A species that fought without calculation, that died without fear, that loved without limit. The galaxy prayed it would never need them. But deep down, every species knew the truth. Darkness would come again. Threats would rise that could not be faced alone. And when that happened, when all hope seemed lost, they would call for the humans, and the humans would come. They always came. 10 years had passed since the Battle of HFY. 10 years since humanity had become a legend. 10 years since the galaxy had learned to fear the species that cared too much. Kevin Hayes was not the same man he had been. The young sergeant who had carried Veloci children through burning streets was now a captain, his hair turning gray at the temples, his eyes carrying the weight of too many memories. He had been promoted again and again, not because he wanted the ranks, but because the people who could have taken them were dead. He stood in the great hall of the Galactic Assembly, wearing a dress uniform covered in medals he had never asked for. Around him, the representatives of 400 species watched with those strange, alien expressions he had never learned to read. Counselor Methra was still alive, though he looked older and more fragile than ever. His mechanical support systems hummed quietly as he spoke. "Captain Hayes, thank you for coming. We know this journey was not easy for you. What do you want?" Kevin asked. He did not mean to be rude, but he had lost the ability to pretend. Too many friends had died. Too many nightmares haunted his sleep. He did not have the energy for diplomacy. Methra gestured, and the chamber's displays lit up. Images appeared of burning cities, fleeing refugees, massive warships tearing through space. "The Dominion of Krath," Methra said. "They emerged from the Outer Rim 6 months ago. A warrior species we had believed extinct for centuries. They were not extinct. They were preparing." Kevin studied the images. The Krath were reptilian creatures, covered in scales and natural armor. Their ships were brutal and efficient, designed for conquest. Their soldiers moved in perfect formation, each one a killing machine. "How many systems have they taken?" Kevin asked. 14. They have enslaved billions of sentients. Their fleet is now larger than all assembly forces combined. Methra paused. "We have tried negotiation. They are not interested. We have tried military resistance. We have lost every battle." Kevin closed his eyes. He knew what was coming. He had known since he received the summons. "You want us to fight them," he said. "We are requesting human assistance, yes, under the provisions of the Elite Forces classification." Kevin opened his eyes and looked around the chamber. He saw fear in the alien faces. He saw desperation. But he also saw something else, something that made his stomach turn. He saw calculation. They had done the mathematics. They had determined that human lives were an acceptable cost for victory. They were not asking for help because they valued humanity. They were asking because they needed weapons. "Do you understand what you're asking?" Kevin's voice was quiet but hard. "At Keth 4, we lost a third of our fleet. 2,000 soldiers. Thousands more came home with wounds that will never heal. Thousands more wake up screaming from nightmares they can never escape." He stepped forward. "Those are not numbers, Counselor. Those are people. Sons and daughters. Mothers and fathers. Friends." Methra's machinery hummed nervously. "We understand the sacrifice." "No, you don't." Kevin cut him off. "You calculated the losses and decided they were acceptable. That's not understanding. That's accounting." He looked at each counselor in turn, meeting their alien eyes. "When I carried a dying soldier in my arms at Keth 4, I didn't think about strategic value. I thought about his wife, who would never see him again. I thought about his children, who would grow up without a father. I thought about the hole that his death would leave in the universe." The chamber was absolutely silent. "You classified us as elite forces because you were afraid of us," Kevin continued. "Now you want us to save you because you're afraid of the Krath. Do you see the pattern here, Counselor? You only think about us when you need us. And when the crisis is over, you'll go back to being afraid. You'll go back to keeping us at a distance." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. "I'm going to tell you something that you need to understand. We're not infinite. Our courage, our sacrifice, our willingness to die for strangers, these are not resources that regenerate. Every time you call us, every time we bleed for the galaxy, something inside us breaks. Something that can never be fixed." Methra's colors shifted uncomfortably. "Then, you will not help us?" Kevin laughed. It was not a happy sound. "Of course we'll help you. That's the tragedy, Counselor. You could ask us for anything, treat us however you want, fear us and use us and never truly understand us. And we would still come." because that's who we are." He shook his head. "We can't look at suffering and walk away. Even when we're tired. Even when we're broken. Even when we know we're being used." He turned to leave, then stopped. "But I want you to remember something. When you send us to die, you're spending something precious. Something irreplaceable. And someday, if you keep spending it carelessly, you'll find that there's nothing left." He walked out of the chamber, leaving 400 species in stunned silence. 3 days later, the human fleet departed for Krath space. Admiral Lisa Cole, now 60 years old and still carrying shrapnel from Keth-4, led the armada. 30 ships this time, carrying 50,000 soldiers. The war lasted 3 years. It was the bloodiest conflict in human history since they joined the Assembly. The Krath were not like the Razari. They were intelligent, strategic, and utterly ruthless. They learned human tactics and adapted. They targeted human supply lines. They made the humans pay for every victory in blood. Kevin Hayes fought in 100 battles. He watched friends die in his arms. He held the line on worlds whose names he could barely pronounce, defending people who would never know his sacrifice. And on a cold day in the second year of the war, he received the news that broke him. Admiral Lisa Cole was dead. The Endurance, the ship she had commanded for 20 years, had been destroyed holding a defensive line against a Krath armada. Her final transmission had been broadcast across the galaxy, calm and steady despite the chaos around her. "All vessels, this is Cole. We're not leaving until everyone's clear." That's not negotiable. Cole out. She had saved 20,000 refugees. She had died making sure the last transport ship escaped. Kevin wept for the first time since Keth-4. He wept for the woman who had taught him that courage was not the absence of fear. He wept for the commander who had shown him that love was stronger than death. He wept for his friend who was gone forever. And then he wiped his eyes, picked up his rifle, and went back to war. Because that was what humans did. They broke, and then they kept going. The Krath Dominion fell on a spring morning on a world called Vethener Prime. Kevin Hayes was there when it ended. He stood in the ruins of the Krath capital, surrounded by the bodies of the last enemy soldiers, and felt nothing but exhaustion. 3 years of war, 3 years of death. And now it was over. The galaxy celebrated. 17 species erected monuments to humanity. The Veloci named an entire star system after Admiral Lisa Cole. Songs were written, stories told, legends born. Kevin did not attend the celebrations. He went home. He found a small farm in Montana, in a valley surrounded by mountains that reminded him of nothing he had seen in space. He bought horses because they were simple creatures who asked only for food and care. He built a house with his own hands because he needed something to do with his days, and he tried to forget. But memories do not fade so easily. They came to him in dreams and moments of quiet, in the faces of strangers who reminded him of people he had lost. He remembered Lisa Cole's calm voice giving orders as her ship burned around her. He remembered Maria Reyes, who had died holding a bridge on some forgotten world so that refugees could escape. He remembered Sam Torres, Amy Lynn, and dozens of others whose names were carved into his heart. 50 years passed. The galaxy changed around him. The Razari never recovered from Keth-4. The swarms turned on each other in civil wars that would burn for generations. The Krath Dominion was gone, its people scattered and broken. New threats rose and fell, and each time humanity was called to fight. And each time, humans answered. Kevin watched from his farm as new generations of soldiers went to war. He saw the casualty reports, the memorial services, the letters sent to grieving families. He recognized the pattern because he had lived it. The galaxy used humanity like a tool, calling when it needed them, fearing them when it did not. He was 89 years old when the young Veloci arrived. The alien's name was Kethval. He was a historian, a scholar who had spent his life studying humanity. He came to Earth to write what he called the definitive account of human military culture. He interviewed veterans. He visited memorials. He read human literature and watched human films. And on his last day, he came to see Kevin Hayes. They sat on the porch of Kevin's farmhouse, watching the sun set over the mountains. Kethfal's compound eyes reflected the orange light, making him look like he was filled with fire. "I have spent a year trying to understand your species," Kethfal said. "I have read your histories. I have spoken to your soldiers. I have studied your art, your music, your stories." He paused. "And I still do not understand." Kevin did not answer immediately. He watched a hawk circle in the distance, riding the wind without effort. "What don't you understand?" he finally asked. "Everything." Kethfal's voice was filled with frustration. "You fight for people you have never met. You die for strangers who do not even know your names. You sacrifice everything for nothing in return." He shook his head. "It makes no sense. There is no logic, no calculation, no benefit. Why do you do it?" Kevin was quiet for a long time. The sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. "Let me tell you about my grandmother," he said at last. "She used to tell me stories about her grandmother, who came to this country with nothing, just hope and dreams and a willingness to work. And when she arrived, people helped her. Strangers. They gave her food when she was hungry. They gave her work when she needed money. They gave her a chance when she had nothing." He turned to look at Kethfal. "She never forgot that. She spent her whole life helping others because someone had helped her. And she taught my grandmother to do the same. And my grandmother taught my mother. And my mother taught me." He smiled, and for a moment, he looked young again. "That's why we do it. Because someone helped us once. And we're just paying it forward." Kethfal was silent. "We're all connected," Kevin continued. "Every species, every world, every soul in this galaxy. When I save someone's child, I'm paying back what someone did for my family 100 years ago. When I die for a stranger, I'm making sure that someone, somewhere, will do the same for my people someday." He looked at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "It's not about logic or calculation. It's about love. We love the universe, even when it doesn't love us back." "But the cost," Kethfal whispered. "So many of your people have died." "Yes." Kevin's voice was heavy. "And we feel every death. We carry them with us forever. Every friend I've lost, every soldier who died under my command, they're still with me. I see their faces when I close my eyes. I hear their voices in my dreams." He paused. "But I also remember why they died. They died so that others could live. They died because they believed that some things are worth dying for." He stood slowly, his old bones creaking. The stars were fully visible now, thousands of them scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. "You call us elite forces because we fight harder than anyone else," Kevin said. "But that's not what makes us human. What makes us human is that we can't look at suffering and walk away. It breaks something inside us. So we fight, not because we're brave or strong or special, but because the alternative is worse. Because we would rather die trying to help than live knowing we didn't." Kethfal rose to stand beside him. "The galaxy prays never to face humans in battle," he said softly. Kevin laughed, and for a moment, he sounded like the young sergeant who had carried a Veloci child through burning streets so many years ago. "Yeah? Well, tell the galaxy this. We pray for the same thing. Every single day." He looked at Kethfal, and his eyes held more than 80 years of memories. War and peace. Love and loss. Hope and despair. "We're not elite forces," he said. "We're just people who care too much. People who can't stop themselves from helping, even when it hurts." People who love so deeply that they'll destroy themselves to protect others. He smiled one last time. And maybe that's the most dangerous thing of all. The sun had set completely now. The mountains were dark shadows against a sky full of stars. Somewhere out there, Kevin knew, new threats were gathering. New wars were brewing. New calls for help would come, and humanity would answer. They always did, not because they were weapons, not because they were tools, not because they were elite forces, but because they were human, and that was enough. It had always been enough. Kethful bowed deeply in the Veloci way, the highest sign of respect his species could show. Thank you, Captain Hayes. I think I finally understand. Kevin watched him go, then turned back to the stars. Somewhere out there, Lisa Cole's memorial floated in space, surrounded by the star system named in her honor. Somewhere out there, the descendants of the Veloci he had saved were living their lives, telling their children about the humans who had come when no one else would. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was still afraid of humanity, but Kevin did not mind. Fear was not the worst thing in the universe. Indifference was worse. Cruelty was worse. The cold calculation that weighed lives on a scale and found them wanting, that was worse. Humans would never be like that. They could not be like that. It was not in their nature, and as long as humans existed, as long as they kept caring too much and loving too deeply and fighting too hard, the galaxy would never truly be lost. Kevin Hayes smiled and went inside to sleep. He did not dream of war that night. He dreamed of a young sergeant carrying a child through fire, promising that everything would be okay, and in his dream, everything was.